On the night of August 10th, 2019, a man died alone in a jail cell in Lower Manhattan. The security cameras that were supposed to be monitoring his every movement had malfunctioned. The two guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes had both fallen asleep at the same time. The man was 66 years old. He was facing federal charges that could have sent him to prison for 45 years. His name was Jeffrey Epstein, and he was one of the most connected individuals in America. He had flown presidents on his private Boeing 727, a plane that journalists came to call the Lolita Express. He had hosted parties at his $77 million Manhattan mansion, where guests included Nobel laureates, heads of state, and captains of industry. He owned a private island in the Caribbean that locals called Little St. James, but that others called something far darker. He counted among his associates some of the most powerful men on Earth, and according to federal prosecutors, he had built a sprawling network that trafficked minors to those powerful men for sexual abuse spanning decades. When morning came on August 11th, Jeffrey Epstein was dead. The official ruling was suicide by hanging. Millions of Americans have never accepted that explanation. The circumstances were too convenient, the failures too numerous. The powerful people who might have been exposed if he testified too obvious. His death ensured their secrets would remain buried. Until today. The United States Department of Justice just released 3.5 million pages of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein and his alleged co-conspirators. That number is almost too large to comprehend. Let me make it real for you. If you printed every page and stacked them on top of each other, the pile would stand taller than 2 Eiffel Towers placed end to end. If you tried to read 1 page per minute, working 8 hours every single day with no weekends and no breaks, it would take you more than 24 years to finish. More than 2,000 videos are included in this release, 180,000 images, FBI investigation files spanning years, federal prosecution records from 2 districts, evidence from the Ghislaine Maxwell trial that put Epstein's closest associate behind bars, documents related to the investigation into how Epstein died in federal custody. This is the single largest criminal document release in American history. But that is not why I needed to talk to you today. The reason I needed to talk to you is what happened after those documents became public. Within hours, files began disappearing from the Department of Justice website. Not random files selected by some automated process. Specific files. Files that mention the President of the United States, Donald Trump, hundreds of times, according to those who captured them before deletion. No announcement, no press release, no official explanation of any kind. One moment the documents were there, accessible to any American who wanted to read them. The next moment, they were gone. I am going to take you through exactly what these files contain. I am going to tell you which powerful names appear and what the documents say about them. I am going to explain what the government is claiming and what the government is refusing to say. And by the time we are finished, you will understand why this matters far beyond any single name, any single allegation, or any single political affiliation. This is a story about whether the powerful are held to the same standards as everyone else. This is a story about whether transparency is real or just theater designed to create the appearance of accountability. This is a story about America. The Epstein Files Transparency Act became law on November 19th of last year. It is almost unheard of for legislation to pass with the margins this bill achieved. 427 members of the House of Representatives voted in favor. Only a single member voted against. The Senate passed it unanimously without a single dissenting voice. In an era when Congress cannot agree on naming post offices without partisan warfare, they agreed on this. President Trump signed it into law himself. He had championed the release during his campaign, promising to expose what others wanted hidden. The bill required the Department of Justice to release all unclassified records related to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell within 30 days of becoming law. That deadline was December 19th. The DOJ missed it. What they released in December was roughly 125,000 pages, less than 4% of what ultimately came out. Many of those pages were almost entirely redacted, black rectangles covering the actual content that Congress had demanded be made public. Within 24 hours of that initial release, some files vanished from the website entirely without any explanation. Members of Congress from both parties publicly criticized the DOJ for failing to meet its legal obligations. Bipartisan frustration is vanishingly rare in today's Washington. This generated it in abundance. The pressure campaign worked. On Friday, January 30th, the floodgates opened. 3.5 million pages released simultaneously in what officials described as compliance with the law. And Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche held a press conference to address what the American people were about to see. I need you to hear his exact words because they matter for everything that comes after. Blanche said, quote, "We did not protect President Trump," end quote. He said documents in the release contain allegations about the president that are, quote, "unfounded and false," end quote. He said that if these allegations had any credibility, they, quote, "certainly would have been weaponized against President Trump already," end quote. More than 500 attorneys worked through weekends and holidays reviewing the materials, he said. He described the volume as 2 Eiffel Towers of paper stacked high. And then he said something that struck many observers as unusual for a press conference meant to demonstrate transparency and accountability. He said there is, quote, "a hunger or a thirst for information that I do not think will be satisfied by the review of these documents," end quote. Stop right there. The official in charge of this historic release just told the American people that even after releasing millions of pages, he knows you will still want answers the documents do not provide. He knows the files are incomplete in some fundamental way. He is managing expectations before anyone has even finished downloading what was released. Why would he say that unless something was deliberately withheld? Why preemptively acknowledge dissatisfaction unless there is a gap between what the public wants and what the government is willing to provide? Here is what happened next. Journalists and researchers began downloading files immediately after they went live on the DOJ website. They understood the historic nature of the moment. They wanted to preserve everything before anything could change. Within hours, multiple independent researchers reported the same troubling phenomenon. Documents were disappearing from the website. Files that had been accessible in the morning were returning error messages by afternoon. And the files that disappeared were not randomly distributed across the millions of pages. They all shared a common element. They contained mentions of President Donald Trump. According to journalists who captured these documents before they were removed, the deleted files contained allegations from individuals who claimed to have witnessed Trump at events with Epstein. Descriptions of parties at various locations over multiple years. References to Mar-a-Lago and other Trump properties. Claims from women who said they had direct experiences involving both men. Some of the allegations were severe in nature. I am not going to detail them here because they remain unverified, because the DOJ itself classified them as tips that investigators could not corroborate due to anonymous sourcing or reliance on secondhand information, and because responsible reporting requires distinguishing clearly between allegation and established fact. But here's the question no one in government has adequately answered. If these allegations are baseless, if they have no credibility as the Deputy Attorney General explicitly stated, why remove them from public view? The DOJ had already announced, publicly and explicitly at a press conference covered by every major outlet, that the claims about Trump in these files are false. Blanche said they have no credibility. He said they would have been used against Trump already if they contained any truth. If that is accurate, leaving the documents visible would demonstrate genuine transparency. It would show Americans exactly the kind of unverified, anonymous, secondhand tips that flood FBI hotlines during high-profile investigations. It would let the public see how investigators sort credible information from noise and conspiracy. It would build confidence in the process. Removing the documents accomplishes the opposite of all of that. It creates suspicion where openness would have built trust. It transforms what was meant to be an exercise in government accountability into what looks, to many observers across the political spectrum, like damage control at the highest levels of power. Now let me tell you about someone else who appears prominently in the historical record of this case, someone whose role in the Epstein scandal connects directly to how we arrived at this moment. This is essential context for understanding why so many Americans distrust official explanations of what happened. His name is Alexander Acosta. In the early 2000s, Acosta served as United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. In that capacity, he oversaw one of the most consequential decisions in the entire Epstein saga. The FBI had investigated Epstein for over a year by that point. Agents had interviewed dozens of victims, young girls who described in disturbing detail being paid for what started as massages but escalated into sexual abuse. By 2007, a federal prosecutor working under Acosta's supervision had drafted a comprehensive indictment. The charges would have applied not just to Epstein himself, but to 3 people who worked for him as personal assistants, individuals allegedly involved in recruiting and grooming victims for abuse. That indictment was never filed. Instead, Acosta approved what would become one of the most criticized plea deals in recent American legal history. Epstein was allowed to plead guilty to state charges in Florida rather than face federal prosecution with its far more severe penalties. He received an 18-month sentence in county jail rather than decades in federal prison. He served only 13 months of that already lenient sentence, and during that time, he was allowed to leave the facility 6 days a week on work release, spending up to 12 hours daily at his office in downtown West Palm Beach. He registered as a sex offender upon release. That was the full extent of his accountability for crimes that federal investigators believed involved dozens of underage victims. The draft indictment that was prepared but never filed is now public. It is part of the files released this week. You can read it yourself and see exactly what charges were planned. You can see how close we came to a different outcome, one where Epstein faced the full weight of federal law in 2007, rather than continuing to operate for another 12 years. And you can understand why, when Donald Trump nominated Alexander Acosta to serve as Secretary of Labor in 2017, critics from both parties questioned the judgment of placing someone who gave Epstein such extraordinary leniency in a cabinet position overseeing labor protections, including those against human trafficking. Acosta resigned that role in July of 2019, exactly 1 month before Epstein died in his cell, as renewed scrutiny of his handling of the original Florida case became politically untenable. The files released this week document the decisions that allowed Epstein to continue operating for more than a decade after he should have been in federal prison facing the charges he deserved. Speaking of those who enabled Epstein's crimes, let me tell you about Ghislaine Maxwell. Her name appears throughout these documents because she was not merely an associate of Epstein. According to prosecutors who secured her conviction, she was the architect of his entire operation. Maxwell is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a British media mogul who died under mysterious circumstances in 1991. She moved in elite circles her entire life. She dated Epstein for a period and then remained his closest confidant for decades. According to testimony at her trial, she personally recruited young girls, often from vulnerable backgrounds, and groomed them for abuse. She normalized the exploitation. She made victims feel they were participating in something acceptable. And when federal prosecutors finally brought her to trial in late 2021, a jury found her guilty on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking of a minor. Ghislaine Maxwell is currently serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison. The files released this week include extensive documentation from her case, evidence that was used to convict her, and materials that shed light on how she and Epstein operated for so long without consequences. Her conviction demonstrated that accountability was possible, but it also raised the question that haunts all of this. If Maxwell could be convicted, if her role could be proven in court beyond reasonable doubt, what about others who allegedly participated? What about the powerful men who visited the island, flew on the plane, attended the parties? Where are their trials? Now let me tell you about some of the other names that appear in these newly released files alongside President Trump. Elon Musk. Today, he is the wealthiest human being on the planet. He owns the social media platform where global discourse now happens, where presidents announce policy and journalists break news, and ordinary people debate the issues of our time. He has become one of President Trump's closest advisors, playing a central role in government efficiency initiatives that are reshaping federal agencies. He is, by virtually any measure, one of the 3 or 4 most influential people in the world. His name appears in the Epstein documents multiple times. Emails show direct communication between Musk and Epstein, planning visits to Epstein's private Caribbean island. In December of 2013, Musk wrote asking when would be a good time to visit, mentioning he would be in the area over the holidays. Epstein replied that any day from the 1st to the 8th of January would work, and that there would, quote, always be space for you, end quote. A follow-up exchange discussed logistics for arriving on January 2nd, with Musk asking when they should head to the island. Another email, with the sender and recipient names redacted, carried the subject line, quote, alert, organize Elon Musk to the island for January 2nd, question mark, end quote. In an earlier exchange from November 2012, Epstein asked Musk how many people would be arriving by helicopter. Musk reportedly responded by asking what day or night would have, quote, the wildest party on your island, end quote. I must be precise about the limits of what we can verify. NBC News has stated it has not confirmed whether Musk actually made any of these trips. Being in communication with Epstein prior to his 2019 arrest was not illegal in itself. Hundreds of prominent people interacted with him socially and professionally before the full extent of his crimes became widely known and prosecuted. But the nature of these specific exchanges, the casual planning of island visits, the question about which night would feature the wildest party, these raise questions that someone in Musk's position of power and influence should address publicly and directly. Questions about judgment and associations. Questions about what he knew about Epstein and when he knew it. Questions about what happened during any visits that may have occurred. Now let me tell you about a name that connects this document release directly to decisions being made in Washington right now, at this very moment. This is where the story takes a turn that feels, to many observers, almost too coincidental to be random. Kevin Warsh. If you follow financial markets closely, you know him as a former Federal Reserve governor who served during the 2008 financial crisis and its chaotic aftermath. If you do not follow financial markets, you are about to learn why his name matters to your daily life and the economic future of your family. Just days before these Epstein documents were released to the public, President Trump nominated Kevin Warsh to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. This is the position that sets interest rates for the entire American economy. It influences whether inflation rises or falls. It determines whether your mortgage becomes affordable or crushing. It affects whether businesses hire or lay off workers. It shapes the economic reality of 330 million Americans and influences markets around the entire world. It is arguably the second most powerful economic position in the nation after the presidency itself. Kevin Warsh appears in the Epstein Files. A 2010 email circulating among Epstein's contacts lists individuals who would be vacationing in St. Bart's during the Christmas holiday season. Warsh is named on page 4 of that list, with a notation that he had a house near a location on the island at that time. We do not know if he actually made the trip. We do not know the context of his inclusion on this list. We do not know what relationship, if any, he had with Jeffrey Epstein beyond appearing in this single documented communication. But here is what we do know with certainty. The man about to be confirmed by the Senate as chairman of the Federal Reserve appears in documents connected to a convicted sex trafficker who died awaiting trial on charges of trafficking minors. This was true before Trump announced the nomination. Someone involved in the vetting process either missed this connection entirely or decided it was not disqualifying for one of the most important economic positions in America. The American public and the senators who will vote on confirmation deserve to understand which explanation applies. Steve Bannon is also in these files. The former White House chief strategist, one of the key architects of Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, exchanged emails with Jeffrey Epstein in 2018, years after Epstein's initial conviction and registration as a sex offender. The subject of their correspondence? Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. The same Jerome Powell that President Trump has criticized relentlessly for years, accusing him of keeping interest rates higher than Trump believed appropriate. In their exchange, Epstein wrote that removing Powell from the Fed chairmanship, quote, should have been done months ago, end quote. Bannon responded by asking if Epstein could help, quote, get rid of Powell, end quote. A convicted sex offender and a senior White House advisor discussing Federal Reserve personnel policy in documented correspondence, emails that the federal government possessed for years before releasing them to the public this week. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is in black and white in files that any American can now access and read. What is not in these files may matter as much as what they contain. There is no client list. For years, the American public has demanded to know the names of men who allegedly participated in Epstein's abuse network as clients. The assumption, perhaps hope, was that somewhere in government files there existed a definitive roster of the powerful men who used Epstein's criminal services. Names that would bring accountability. Names that would prove the system can reach even the most protected. Deputy Attorney General Blanche addressed this expectation directly at his press conference. He said the public should not expect to find such a list in these documents. Either it does not exist in any form, or it has been withheld under exemptions that the law allows for protecting victim privacy and ongoing investigations. After 3.5 million pages, after 2 Eiffel Towers of paper, that central question remains completely unanswered. The political implications of this release extend in every direction simultaneously. We are 9 months from the 2026 midterm elections. Trust in government institutions has reached historic lows, according to virtually every major poll. Just this week, the same Justice Department that released these Epstein files sent FBI agents to execute a search warrant at an election center in Georgia, seeking physical ballots from the 2020 presidential election. The Trump administration has requested voter data from 24 states and the District of Columbia. Critics call these actions politically motivated attempts to legitimize false claims about the 2020 election. Supporters call them necessary steps to ensure election integrity going forward. What virtually everyone agrees on is that the credibility of American institutions is being tested from multiple angles simultaneously, and that test is not going well. In this environment, every redaction in the Epstein files becomes suspicious to those inclined toward suspicion. Every deleted document becomes evidence of cover-up to those ready to believe it. Every missed deadline, every carefully worded non-answer from officials, every file that appears on a government website and then vanishes hours later feeds a narrative that the powerful protect each other while ordinary Americans play by entirely different rules. That narrative may or may not accurately describe reality, but the way this release has been handled, the way documents were removed without explanation, has done absolutely nothing to dispel it. Let me bring this back to the fundamental question that every American should be asking, because everything else flows from this single inquiry. Why did the Department of Justice remove documents mentioning the President of the United States within hours of releasing them? There may be entirely benign explanations: duplicate files that needed consolidation, technical errors in the upload process that caused corruption, documents that inadvertently violated the privacy protections Congress mandated for victims of Epstein's crimes. Any of these explanations could theoretically be true. Not a single one of them has been officially confirmed. The DOJ has offered no specific explanation for why these particular files disappeared while millions of others remained accessible. And in the conspicuous absence of that explanation, Americans are left to reach their own conclusions based on what they observe. Some will trust that the removals were routine, unremarkable, technical housekeeping unworthy of concern. Others will see evidence of protection being extended at the highest levels of government to the man who sits in the Oval Office. The DOJ created this situation by removing files without ever explaining why. They bear full responsibility for the suspicion that has predictably followed. They had the opportunity to demonstrate complete, unambiguous transparency and deliberately chose a different path. That choice has consequences for public trust that will persist long after this news cycle ends. The Epstein scandal has always been about more than one man's crimes, as horrific as those crimes were. It has been about a system that allegedly enabled those crimes to continue for decades while authorities looked the other way. About the powerful people who surrounded him, who flew on his private planes, who visited his properties around the world, who accepted his money and his social introductions, and who either willfully ignored what he was doing or, in some cases, according to victims, actively participated in it. It has been about whether accountability applies equally to a billionaire with connections and a working-class person without them. It has been about whether America truly has one system of justice or two. Today's document release and the mysterious, rapid removal of certain files ensures these questions will dominate our national conversation for months and potentially years to come. Every time a journalist discovers a new name buried in the millions of pages, every time a connection is drawn between Epstein and someone currently serving in power, every time an email surfaces showing how casually the elite interacted with a convicted predator, the questions will resurface with renewed intensity. What did they know? When did they know it? What did they do? And why has no one beyond Epstein himself and Ghislaine Maxwell faced meaningful consequences? There is one more number I want you to carry with you from this discussion, because amid all the famous names and political implications, it can be easy to lose sight of what actually matters most. According to the files released this week, FBI investigators identified more than 1,200 potential victims of Jeffrey Epstein and his network. 1,200 people. Not abstractions, not numbers on a page, real human beings who were children when they were exploited. Real people who carry trauma that will never fully heal, no matter how many documents are released or how many powerful names are exposed. Whatever names appear in these files, whatever political consequences follow from these revelations, whatever happens to the wealthy and influential individuals mentioned in these pages, those 1,200 survivors are why this matters. They are the reason Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with near unanimous support. They are the reason the American public demanded answers for years. They are the human beings at the center of a story that too often focuses on the rich and famous men who surrounded their abuser, rather than the young people whose lives were devastated. The files are available now, 3.5 million pages waiting to be searched by anyone with an internet connection and the determination to look. Thousands of videos waiting to be reviewed by journalists and researchers around the world. The work of fully understanding what these documents contain will take months or years to complete. New revelations will emerge. Some will change what we think we know about this case. Some will confirm suspicions that observers have held for years. Some will raise entirely new questions that no one has yet thought to ask. What happens next depends on whether Americans across the political spectrum demand the complete, unvarnished truth or accept the partial selective disclosure we have received so far. The documents are there. The gaps are visible to anyone willing to look. The questions remain stubbornly unanswered, and the only people who can insist on complete accountability are you and every other citizen watching this unfold. This is not the end of the Epstein story. In many ways, it represents a new and potentially more consequential beginning. A beginning that starts with 3.5 million pages of evidence and ends somewhere none of us can yet clearly see. Stay informed, ask hard questions, demand real accountability. Do not let this story fade from attention, because the powerful have always counted on our collective short attention span and willingness to move on to the next outrage. Every time the public forgets, they win. Not this time. Prove them wrong.